What's going on, Tamers? It's me, East, and today is finally the day. I'm doing the BT17 DexDorugoramon deck profile. Although I guess it would be difficult to call this one a deck profile because we're going to change up the formula just a little bit. Normally in a deck profile video, you'd see one deck and then I talk about each of the cards, but I was really meticulous on this one, and I have all of my builds from week 1 up until the most current build, which is the one I've pretty much settled on. And what I'd like to do is kind of follow the theme of the Dorugoramon line in the Digimon Secret set, and that is evolution through death. And so in this video, of course, we're going to go through and talk about what the DexDorugoramon deck does, but in addition to that, I want to talk about each of the builds that I made and kind of how I made the decisions to build them that way. So while you may not end up going with the end result build that I have, I think I'm giving a bunch of different options that you can choose from when you're making the deck yourself. And so let's dive in with the first deck for the week 1 Dorumon build. So this is one of the reasons why you're not supposed to look at any of your old works, because you just want to cringe out of your skin. And that's how I feel looking at this version of the list right here. What you can see is that it's pretty basic, like pretty much the Dorumon lines all throughout the entire deck. I try to keep some of the older stuff. You'll see like the older DexDorugoramon, DexDorugoramon, as well as the DexDorugoramon. And I try to add in the new cards like the Yusenji Tamer, the purple one here, and alongside him, of course, the Kosuke Kizukata, and then a couple copies of Cool Boy to help search out through the deck, as well as cards like Dorudin for some removal. The basic premise of the deck is you can actually get out the Kosuke Tamers by moving your Dorumon from the breeding area to the raising area, and if you have one in your hand, the Tamer that is, you can just slide it up underneath him. And then from there, as you go up the line, you get really nice effects, and they also allow you to draw more through the deck to find the pieces you need. So you'll get to the Dorugoramon, and then he can, discard one, draw one. You can use cards like the DexDorugoramon to gain extra memory, and as well as sink more cards into the trash and get effects like Blocker and Retaliation. The new DexDorugoramon is nice because he can evolve from the trash. The big gimmick with this deck for the BT17 set is that if you have one of the non-Dex cards on the field, so for example, the Dorugamon, or Dorugreymon, or Dorugoramon, if they would be destroyed for whatever reason and you have the appropriate or the same level Dex card in the trash, you can Digivolve from the trash and prevent that deletion, which is very strong because in addition to that, you also get other effects. Of these, the strongest being the DexDorugoramon, who allows you to De-Digivolve 3 stages on something on your opponent's side of the board, and then destroy the lowest level Digimon there. So my experience playing the deck with the week 1 build is that, the BT17 Dorumon and DexDorugoramon, they feel really nice having reboot because you can now attack and then you can just reboot and then use the blocker effect from the Tamer to actually be offensive and defensive in the same moves. It did become really clear though that I almost always wanted the BT9 DexDorugoramon over the newer BT17 one because of the memory gain. The older one, you discard a card, you gain +1 memory. If you've got Cool Boys on the board, you can make a huge swing and get like 3 memory back, for example. Additionally, the old level 5 DexDorugoramon felt necessary because it can, pop level 4s before they can become aces, which is just a good way to make sure that when you do attack, you don't get your whole stack yeeted. Additionally, the Ryusenji Tamer, the purple one here, felt a little expensive for the return that he gave. Being able to get a memory back only when you put a Tamer underneath one of your Digimon felt a little lackluster, and the effect of being able to force evolve into the Dexmon cards in trash didn't really seem that useful. You typically wanted to use them for defense, and so having him evolve for offense seemed a little unnecessary. I will say that the one big theme of the deck is, even though I mentioned that there's lots of ways this deck can draw, you've got the BT7 Dorumon, you've got cards like Cool Boy, you've got the Dorugamon, and you've got multiple evolves at every level to really just cycle through cards very quickly. It still felt that I was not getting the cards fast enough, and I still felt that something was lacking. And so trying to be thematically on brand here, after I got beat up at my first week of locals, I thought to myself, reflected on my games, said, okay, how can I make the deck a little bit better and get rid of some of the shortcomings that I felt that first week? And all that led me to the V2 build, which you see here. Now, a couple of changes right off the bat. I added in the BT9 Dorumon over the BT17 Dorumon at the level 3s, just because even though I liked the reboot effect, I needed to find cards faster, and the BT9 Dorumon just lets you do that really quickly. Discard a card so I could sink one of my Dex cards into the trash and then quickly just draw 2 more. Additionally, you see that I cut the BT17 DexDorugoramon at the level 4s entirely to open up more space for regular Dorugamon, which you see the BT13 copies here. Additionally, I changed the Dorugreymon to level 5, the splits here, to reduce the old DexDorugray to just 1, and I added in more Dorugreymons to get around the DP- effects that were pretty rampant in the game with yellow decks. And additionally, like I said before, I felt that I was lacking in the first build with the deck, being able to draw cards quickly enough, so I added in the defense trainings here for better card draw and memory efficiency at the same time. So with new deck in hand, I went back out to locals and I tested this one out, and a couple of notes from the games that I played. It often felt difficult to set up correctly, like, getting the DexDorugoramon into the trash, finding my Tamer early on, and then collecting all the pieces I need. But the games where I did set up quickly, I felt very powerful. But otherwise, I kind of died just finding pieces, which kind of made for some pretty lackluster games. That feeling of trying to find all your pieces and get them set up really quickly, it often felt like I was fighting against the deck in many cases more than my opponent. One great example of this is, dropping a BT7 Dorumon on the board, who can only search X-Antibody cards, and then bottom decking a Kosuke, often felt like a death sentence in many games. Additionally, the BT13 Dorugamon kind of feels a little lackluster, even though he is a bit cheaper at 4, having no effect, and the just plus 1000 in inheritance didn't really add much to the deck overall. And additionally, you see that I've cut a couple of the upper end dex cards in the Death Xmon itself, as well as the old DexDorugoramon, because in most cases I just wanted to evolve from trash to get the effect that way as a way to save myself, rather than just offensively evolving into him. There were really very few cases, if any at all, where the old DexDorugoramon was better than the new one. Overall, while I think there were some improvements to the deck in adding the defense trainings as well as the Dorumon, I could find my pieces a bit more often, but there were many times where I still felt like I couldn't find everything. I just died doing that. So with that in mind, I went to the third version of the deck, which introduced a couple of different changes. The point I really want to hammer home here is the changes adding the Dorumon and the defense training felt like great pluses and really big wins for the deck, but I still felt like many times when I sat down to play, I was fighting against two people at one time, my opponent and my own deck. And so with that in mind, I kind of got lost, and we'll take a look at that when we see the third version of this deck for the Dorumon build. So V3 of the deck was me going back and re-evaluating a lot of the cards that I thought were initially useless that might actually be a bit more useful than I thought. A couple of changes here right off the bat is I reintroduced the new version of the level 4 DexDorugoramon back into the deck at the one copy you see there. I also cut one of the DP minus blocking Dorugramons at the level 5. I also added in an extra DexDorugoramon at level 6 because sometimes it's hard to find a copy of him when there's only 2 copies of him in the deck. Additionally, I added in some interesting option cards and things like the Final Zubagon Punch to maybe generate some more offense, as well as cards like X-Antibody Protoform to make the deck even more memory efficient. This version of the deck actually taught me a lot of things. The Final Zubagon Punch felt really nice for times when an opponent didn't actually present a board. With Kosuke, he gives you Piercing, which is great if your opponent has something down, but if they don't have something down on the board and you can't actually delete a Digimon, then your Dorugoramon just swings for 1 check and that's it. With Final Zubagon Punch, I can at least generate a little bit more offense this way, and if they do present something on board, then the Final Zubagon Punch means I'm essentially hitting for like 4 security. The X-Antibody was okay, but honestly it felt like it was only really useful for getting from the level 4s to the level 5s. The level 5s itself can typically just evolve for free with the collision effect and his own on your turn, or on both turns effect, excuse me. Going from level 5 to level 6 was actually not that useful, just because the Dorugoramon himself actually has the effect to evolve for free, so there wasn't really many other opportunities to use the Protoform outside of that one range of 4 to 5. The BT9 DexDorugoramon at the level 5s here started to feel a little bit less useful. Initially, I thought where I could just discard a card and then pop a level 4, it became more useful to actually pop a 6 cost or lower, just because that includes level 5 aces. So if my opponent did even have level 4 on the board, in most cases his effect would take them out, but if they also additionally just had an ace down, that was a great target for him as well. So yeah, there were a lot of positives that came out of this version of the deck, even though I don't think it's that great at all. But I will say the one big pain point was still the fact that the games feel like they hinged on me finding Kosuke fast enough, and with only 4 copies in the deck, that can be really tough when there's no way to actually search out the SoC Tamer in this case. All of this brought me to the 4th version of the deck, where I really honed in on that Tamer pain point, where you see here I added in multiple copies of Marvin Jackson. I even added in one of the Eiji Nagasumi cards, as these are all SoC Tamers. I even added in, even though my gut was really against it in the beginning, Airdramons as a way to get down Tamers outside of just, the Dorumon from Kosuke. Some other small changes here were that I cut the BT13 Dorugamons at the level 4 entirely. I feel like they weren't really pulling their weight along with the rest of the deck, so I just got rid of them. I axed them all in favor of a all BT17 Dorugamon build with the 2 old and 2 new DexDorugoramon. Additionally, I finally got the courage to cut the old BT9 DexDorugoramon to level 5 here entirely in favor of just 2 copies of the new DexDorugoramon instead, to be able to save myself from trash. And then I also swapped out a copy of the Black Doruden card for Metal Impulse. I got a lot of insights from playing this version of the deck as well, and while it wasn't my final version, I learned a lot. For example, Metal Impulse greatly helps against decks with Partition or Armor, or just have Digimon that are really annoying to get past, or have Digimon with aces underneath them as a way to get rid of the ace card without having to destroy the actual stack itself. Additionally, the level 4s, level 5s, the splits here felt perfect for the first time in a long time. I really enjoyed the splits here. Additionally, I should have listened to my gut because the Margas and Airdramon performed awfully. But surprisingly, the AG didn't feel so bad. And even when I had to play him, and even when I did play him down for the full 3 costs, at least he gave memory back. So if I got him out early in the game, I got something back for a pretty low cost for your opponent just having a Digimon on board. And so I kept all this in the back of my mind when I was retooling the deck for the final time and really thinking about how I can make this build really useful and not have to fight against my Tamers to find them quickly to set up and win the game. And so at this point, it's like the 4th version of the deck, and I'm just kind of voicing my frustrations out on Twitter of like, I like the deck itself, like when it works, but when it doesn't work, man, having to fight and find my Tamers really felt like a slog. And I was voicing these frustrations on Twitter, and that's when Patty from the Card Protagonist YouTube channel, shout outs to those folks making great videos, by the way, reached out to me and said, "Hey man, have you tried a different like build of the deck?" And I said, "Well, I'm on 4 at this point, so at this point I don't really know where to go." And he said, "Well, what if instead of the Dorumon cards, you actually focused on Lugomon?" And so when he said that, I thought back to the moments that I had AG, and I was like, "Oh, wait a second." And it felt like the Plus Ultra moment from Boku no Hero Academia where like they showed like the lights from One for All like connecting the different like generations, like wait a second, we can do this. And I said, okay, let's take what we've learned here from just having the AG. We'll take in, Patty's quirk from, the Card Protagonist channel, and we'll try out Lugomon. Which brought me to the 5th version and the final version of the deck, which is the Lugomon build. Some of the changes here, the level 3 Dorumons have been wiped entirely for a more purple-centric and Lugomon-centric version of the deck. We filled in the gaps with Tyrannomon as a way to actually search for my Tamers, and because I'm using Lugomon, it's just more naturally convenient to use AG, the AG Tamer, who gives Alliance and Blocker, and because there's multiple copies of AG in the card pool, I can actually use the AG and the Cracker Fang, which gives me access to more Tamers overall. I added in the one Helugomon just as a trials for emergency situations, and then I added in a more purple focus, swapped the defense trainings to the wisdom trainings, and then finally I removed the removal options in the deck in favor of some more control tools and things like the Digimon Emperor. Some of the pros for the deck are that the Lugomon cards can pull Tamers from trash. So in the case where you have to discard a card and you have nothing but AG Tamers there, you can do that without worrying about it because you can just use the Lugomon to pull them back later on. Additionally, Lugomon being X-Antibody means he's also searchable with cards like Cool Boy. The Baomon means that you can actually force evolve from trash if necessary whenever you're mind linking. This leads to less situations where you don't have the one level you need, because if you've played, like for example, a level 4 before and then it dies, it goes to trash, and then later you pull out your level 3 Lugomon, you can use the Lugomon to stack a Tamer up underneath him and then use the Baomon's effect to immediately evolve from the trash into the level 4. Overall, this just makes for less bricky hands. And then finally, the huge plus factor here is that the AG Tamers with Alliance put massive pressure on empty boards, where when I was playing the Dorumon build with Kosuke, piercing, like I said before, doesn't really put a lot of pressure on because you're still just checking for 1. But if there's nothing on the board, then you just swing for 2. I do want to be fair and honest here in that there were a couple of cons, and with only 8 level 3s in the deck, they can sometimes be difficult to find, but hard playing a Tyrannomon won't be the worst thing in the world, and so he'll be a way to also find 2 cards at once, and he also puts up a blocker. Additionally, I really honed in on the keyword of consistency in the deck, and so as a result, you see that I ended up cutting all of the removal options, like things like Metal Impulse or Doruden entirely, for more search or memory focused Tamers and option cards. And so after that long journey, this is the version of Dorugoramon that I ended up with. And honestly, it feels buttery smooth. There are still a couple of games where, it's hard to find your pieces, or, something just doesn't go your way, but that's card games. I mean, every deck goes through that. Sometimes you just get a bad draw. But for the most part, this feels way better than the week 1, week 2, week 3 version of the deck that I started with. And so with that, next I want to talk about some of the matchups for the deck that I think are really important and some of the important points for the games. So what you see here on screen is what I would consider my matchup chart for this deck, and let's kind of go through these bit by bit. First one that I want to talk about is Imperial Dramon. Unfortunately, this, as you've probably heard on Twitter, is a really difficult matchup. Their resting effects really erases your defenses. It kind of stops you from redirecting attacks using blocking. No aces means you're kind of a sitting duck on defense as well. They don't really have to worry about like something happening whenever they attack because you don't have any ace cards at all, and there's no, in this version of the deck anyway, security options that would stop them otherwise. And because they typically have jamming, like pretty much all the security checks will go through. You also can't reliably leave your Tamers in your sources because they can source strip whenever they do the De-Digivolve, which is really scary because you don't want to lose your Tamers. Additionally, DexDorugoramon's effect should only destroy the Ken and Davis Tamer if possible. His ability to pop an unsuspended Tamer, if you can hit a Ken and Davis Tamer, that is always going to be like the preferred choice. And finally, in many other games, you typically want to keep the DexDorugoramon in trash. You just see him in hand, you toss him from some effect, and then later you can Digivolve into him whenever you would die. In this matchup though, it's sometimes important to keep him in hand because De-Digivolve is such a powerful mechanic against partition decks. Additionally, it's a really good defense. In fact, it's probably your only defense against like cards like the Return of the Ancestors option card with the nasty delay effect. So when you think of partition and this really crazy option card that they got that I'm still surprised that they printed, De-Digivolve is the answer. And even with all this in mind, it still is an uphill matchup. I mean, it feels like they're just a bit faster than you and they can just bypass your defenses entirely. So if you can destroy the level 5s and hope that they don't find more pieces, that's probably your one out. But other than that, it's going to be tough. Next up is going to be Tyrant Kabuterimon. I say this one has advantage, but it could be even. Tyrant has really good removal in that he can get rid of and bottom deck cards. And that's one of the forms of removal that you can't fight against, where DexDorugoramon is great against deletion effects. In this case, Tyrant Kabuterimon bypasses that. I will say though, Alliance does make this matchup a lot easier, where in many cases you could just put out, two big Digimon and then swing, and Tyrant Kabuterimon cannot get over that. And because he has to be rested to gain immunity effects, and whatever you swing into is going to probably die, and you can then unsuspend with the Dorugoramon effect, and even if they redirect away from their Tyrant Kabuterimon to try and save him, Dorugoramon's going to become active when he destroys the other Digimon, and then he can just swing again. And as always against any green deck, fight for the board. If you fight for the board and you win it, then you win the game. That being said, you cannot allow your opponent to just have time to set up, so you have to put on some pressure immediately from the get-go. In game of attrition, I think the Tyrant Kabuterimon actually wins this one. And then also, be careful of your Tamers and the Mind Link choices before you swing in case of something like a Grand Kawagamon Ace. He's a really annoying card to deal with because he can pop your Tamers if they're just sitting on the board, so be sure that you can always have a Tamer tucked under something in case that they have like the potential to blast. So, Numamon. Feels pretty good, but there's a couple things you need to be really careful of. The first one, calculate your DPs very carefully. When you have to keep in mind things like Valkyremon Ace, just imagine what DP minuses will look like and just make sure you kind of get over those thresholds if possible. Additionally, their most dangerous play for you is Venusmon into Ruin mode. Venusmon is so good at just shutting off your deck for an entire turn. You need to be very careful and do your best to make sure they cannot get to level 6, even though I know that's kind of a almost impossible statement. Swinging with Dorugomon with the safety of the DexDorugoramon in trash is important to thwart a lot of their threats, for ace cards. Just because whenever he does come down, you can just immediately just yeet the ace, and in a lot of cases you can also get rid of some really useful inheritance effects like security attack +1. Additionally, use collision to your advantage here. It will always help you keep their board in check because they can go wide. You want to use this effect to keep those numbers in check. Outside of the Platinum Numamon, if they can't find them very quickly, then you can typically just pop their Numamon cards with the Dex Guard's Evo effect. Additionally, if you have Tamers, try to keep them either in your hand or in the trash before you make a huge play. You probably want to prioritize training cards over them if you have both in hand, just because if your opponent finds a Death Xmon, then the Tamer's only going to be a net negative for you. Next up is Omni, and this is a deck where I played against it quite a bit, but I don't know if my opponents were great, and so I'd say even to advantage here. You can pretty much set up protection as long as you sink a DexDorugoramon into the trash. Outside of that, really, it's just a speed battle. If you assume that Omnimon will always come, which you probably should, then your play is to build a Dorugoramon in the battle area and then hold on to a Dorugoramon in raising. If you can do that, because Omni's removal is kind of based on level, if you have a Dorugoramon and a Dorugoramon, they're forced to bottom deck the Dorugoramon to prevent him from being destroyed and then going into the Dex and then immediately removing their ace card. And then you can Digivolve into your DexDorugoramon, or excuse me, DexDorugoramon, as a way to keep him on board whenever they delete him afterward. And then you can go back into a Dorugoramon afterward in order to get rid of their ace. That's kind of a convoluted explanation, but it's probably the most important thing you need to know about that matchup as a way to counter their Omnimon, because if you cannot remove the Omnimon the turn it comes out for the counter blast, you're probably going to lose the game. Next up is Armor Vaccine, and you can probably guess this one, just disadvantage. They're just too memory efficient. Armor Purge prevents deletion effects, which 9 times out of 10 means you're often not going to be able to unsuspend per the Dorugoramon or DexDorugoramon effect. Cards like Hearthstone might be a way for you to expose a card or a non-armor card underneath one of your opponent's Digimon, but when their options are, or their build is like Patamon, Rapidmon, Rapid X, or Magna X, it's virtually unkillable. Like, this is really your worst case scenario. And even when you have cards like the level 4 Dorugamon, who can force an opponent's Digimon to attack, even if they have just like a Patamon, they can choose their start of main phase effect, so they can actually Digivolve first into the Rapidmon if they have it in security, and then attack, so that way they don't get destroyed, or they just end up living. I will say though that collision is your friend in this game, just because it targets the player and not the Digimon. So even if they have just one Magnamon on the board, you can actually force them to block with that, and then maybe you could find another Digimon on board to attack with to get rid of either the Ace underneath it or the Rapidmon underneath it. So next up is Gallantmon, Advantage. Once you get your Dorugoramon up, their chance of victory narrows to a super slim margin. They need to basically catch your Dorugoramon rested with a BT17 Gallantmon, and that's not likely. Be careful to watch out for their Crimson Mode Ace though. A good countermeasure is to always use Alliance with a level 4 on your Dorugoramon when you attack. This way you can just get over it if you're swinging into it. Even if you're not going to get the second security check, or you're going to pass up the second security check, just being able to swing and get rid of the level 6 without having to worry about the Crimson Mode coming down is a boon. Keep in mind that Crimson Mode's threshold for deletion is 15,000 or lower, and if you swing with higher than that, he just can't touch you. And now we come to the blue decks, aka stop bouncing all my crap. The first one is going to be Mirage Galgamon, disadvantage. If you don't run Dorumon, this matchup is incredibly rough. Running Lugumon has its advantages, but the one big disadvantage you do run is that you are no longer protected from bounce the turn. The Dorumon would come down, he would slot a Kosuke Tamer underneath him. Because you've removed that element of the deck entirely, and you've gone more aggressive and then more, I guess, consistent for the AG Tamer, you do not have the way to play around these kinds of blue decks. The bouncing card gets around all of the trash effects you've set up for the dexes. You have so many cards to put into your hand, and the Mirage Galgamon gets tons of free memory this way. You're essentially helping them with their own game plan, and then having no ace means you're virtually defenseless on attack, because they can also prevent things from redirecting, so you can't even block them. And yeah, you just have no out in this case. Additionally, there's also the Ancient Garurumon deck, and this is a disadvantage as well, just because it's like Mirage Galgamon, but just faster. Ancient Bounce stops all of your trash effects. The Venusmon also shuts off most of your effects. Helugamon really is your only answer to her in this case. The hybrids get around Digimon Kaiser's Disruption, so you're really it feels like they're threading a needle of all of the things that get around your deck, but they do it really well. And I guess the last one I will touch on is one that's not super common, but one that I do see, and that is Ancient Greymon. Even or advantage, probably advantage. Their destruction falls right in line with your dex cards, and the De-Digivolve really hurts the Ancient Greymon strategy, or the Kaiser Greymon effects. One warning though is that you do still need to find their pieces pretty quickly, because they are a relatively fast deck. Whew! Alright, we have talked about a lot in this one. I've talked about tons of different ways to build the deck. I've talked about the game plan for the deck. I've talked about some of the matchups for the deck. And look, you don't have to build the deck the exact same way that I did, but I hope that all the info presented here was useful to help you make some informed decisions when you do build the deck yourself. All in all, Dorugoramon is a very fun deck, and if you've been waiting for a deck to make, this Digimon shine, this is the one for you. It's the one to go in on, I promise you. Collision's a really cool effect, Digivolving from trash is a really cool effect, and once you get the game plan going with your AG Tamers, it's really hard to stop the deck. Most things can take out, or most decks can take out one level 6, but taking out 2 because of the evolve from trash is really difficult, especially when there's some disruption between the two of them. Additionally, I'm sure there's some folks out there who have some other really great nuggets of information about this deck. If you have played the deck before and you have some great wisdom you'd like to share, feel free to put it down in the comments below. I'm sure some other folks would really enjoy reading it, and they'd love the the discussion. If you have any questions about anything that I didn't talk about in here, feel free to put those in the comments below as well. Guys, I'm always reading, trying to help you folks out, so put them down there. I'll get them answered as soon as I possibly can. Anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.